Dom, congratulations on a remarkable effort with this book. It's so touching, moving. I could relate to it, obviously, through our own experience. But with your sort of doctor's and your dad's hat on, just explain to our audience what Malachy was born with and what the issues were.
Malachy was born with, so a normal heart has two main pumping chambers, one that pumps to the lungs and one that pumps to the body. And in Malachy, the chamber that pumps to his lungs didn't form. So he basically had one decent chamber, and even that one had some issues. So there were, he needed quite a lot of corrective surgery just to be able to oxygenate his blood and get something like a normal circulation.
With your doctor's knowledge of these things, did that make it worse for you in coping with the emotional side of Malachy's birth?
That is something people ask me a lot, and I'm never sure because I was already a doctor before he was born, so I can't tell the difference between being a doctor and not being a doctor. I always thought that it was probably helpful that I understood what the doctors were telling me, so I didn't really have to waste time getting my head around the technical side of things. It was perhaps more of a problem for Maggie because sometimes doctors would fall into telling things straight up to me because I shared their language, whereas Maggie had to sometimes pull them back and get them to explain in more detail.
But the two of you knew very quickly the severity of Malachy's issues.
On that very, very first day of his life, Maggie got flown to Sydney in a helicopter with Malachy, and I went up by car, and we ended up in an interview room at Sydney Children's Hospital in Randwick till, 10:30 or 11 at night with one of the paediatric cardiologists telling us what they'd found by that time. There was a lot of information, a lot of concerning interactions in that first day. By the end of that day, we really didn't know what you could predict about his life. It was a bit, he could die tomorrow, he might be fine till he's 30.
Congenital heart disease, or childhood heart disease, as some people call it, you and Maggie have been part of bringing that to the forefront of life in Australia. Even when Malachy was born in 1999, even when our son was born in 2001, there was still really, relatively speaking, not much known about it.
I still feel like there's not much known. It seems to be an unrecognised burden of illness with heart disease in children. Yeah, it's something about the marketing of this condition, which is really quite common, doesn't entirely cut through. Abnormalities are as common as 1% of live births in Australia. It just isn't really on our radar. We don't sort of go into a pregnancy or come out of a pregnancy thinking, oh, there's a 1% chance this baby could have heart disease. So it was oddly shocking given that.
To fly above the scene, to fly above the arc of Malachy's life and your experience with this amazing young fella, how do you describe that now? And I'll add to that question with, when was the day that you thought, I really would like to commit to writing a book about our experience?
The time I sat down to write at first was 12 or 18 months after Malachy had died. It had been quite a heavy year or year and a half of grieving, and Maggie and I had gone about doing that in our own different ways. And certainly Maggie really likes to read about other people's experience and try to chart what might lie ahead. And she found there wasn't really much at all that was along the lines of what we were going through. So there was a bit like with Heart Kids when Malachy was born, there wasn't much infrastructure, there wasn't a very big charity, there wasn't much profile. We found the same thing here. There was this gap that I think we both felt acutely. We both felt there's people who've written stuff about death. Maybe there's a handbook to the stages of grief, that sort of thing, but nothing that really tells you this is what it's like. This is the real experience of people who lose a child, and this is how it happens and how it feels. Nothing that really spoke to us as, hey, look, there's someone else who's been through what we've been through. I started to feel like, you know what? Malachy was a writer and we loved talking about writing. I was aware that he was a very loved character and he was quite an amazing child. And I thought, well, his story could be quite uplifting to people. I was a bit unsure whether families going through childhood heart disease, whether the story of someone like Malachy would be uplifting because he was such a fantastic guy, or whether it would actually be terrible because he died. So at first I didn't know what I'd be writing. I just started writing anecdotes from our life with Malachy. And after a while, I realized it was adding up to something. So I got more serious about it.
What I found incredible and related to so much is the visceral detail that you have in this book and the recall of specific meetings with cardiologists and surgeons, painting a picture of the room. I was reading our own story, Linda's and my story with Sam, when I was reading your book on Malachy. And it is extraordinary how we note these things, isn't it? And we store them somewhere along the way. I'm sure is something that a lot of parents who have had very, very sick kids can relate to.
They are incredibly visceral times, aren't they? And people have said, wow, you seem to have a good memory. But I think the thing about those moments is they are the type of things you never forget. The terrible feeling, the dawning realization, the watching the faces of the people explaining to you and getting that feeling for what that means. It gets burnt into you. It was bringing those memories back because I had to go back to work not long after Malachy died. So I hadn't really taken the time out to remember. So when I started remembering and getting those visceral feelings again, I tried to remember in real detail. And I found the more engaged I got with the detail, the closer I felt to Malachy. The strength of those scenes was, I suppose, the strength of recollection that I was going through in my cathartic writing experience.
Dom, this charismatic, warm, bubbly, effervescent, creative child of yours left a mark on everybody whom he met, be they within Westmead Hospital or Sydney Children's Hospital at Randwick, everybody. What do you think Malachy's legacy is to this day? And it's 8 years roughly since his passing.
I think one of the things that comes through strongly in the book was what in a sense, non-judgmental type of person Malachy was. Heart disease made him an underdog. So he got to be the challenged kid or the disabled kid. That meant that he experienced exclusion from things, whether that was intentional or just wasn't able to do a bunch of things. So he developed a very acute sense of what life feels like for an outsider. So he became a very caring sort of person. And also his life experience made him interact a lot more with adults as a very young person than what a lot of children do. So he had this knowing adult way about him. And I think that carried a certain aura. A lot of people knew how tough many things he had to go through were. And he bore huge challenges or things that children usually don't have to face with such equanimity that I think he was quite inspiring. It's just a story really about how valuable all children are and all lives are. It's just that he's just distilled it so much more, partly for how much he went through in life, but also for the fact that he died.
Malachy was maybe, 3, 4 when Maggie poured herself into Heart Kids and then you came on board as well. We've got the floor here. What can we say about Heart Kids and in terms of getting that message out there? And then also your advice to parents, and there will be parents this very day who are confronting that news that their son or daughter has been born with CHD.
I think it comes out quite strongly in the book. Heart Kids was a real ray of light, an organisation that gave us hope in Malachy's lifetime and gave us the type of understanding and an opportunity to share experience. I would encourage anybody who's got a child with heart disease or anyone in their extended family or people they know who are affected to get involved, find out what you can participate in, how you can support Heart Kids and in return get plenty back. Heart Kids, they're doing a fantastic job now funding for research. They've become sort of bigger and higher profile. And I think they're sort of well on track to give better support, better services, better discoveries to help things like rheumatic heart disease for Indigenous Australians. There's a bit of an epidemic out there in the communities. And hopefully one day find ways of preventing the sort of malformation that Malachy had.
So you, Maggie, and your three wonderful eldest kids, how are you doing today?
Well, it's one of the terrible mysteries about grief. You don't really know how other people are going, and it might only bubble up every now and then unexpectedly. So we did worry for a long time. We couldn't tell, in a sense, how our children were going with the loss of their brother. But they're all just getting on with life. They're fascinating, great people, and each in very different ways. So we're loving seeing them grow up. There's always that current of sadness. It took us a long time to really accept that a family photo only has 5 people in it now. And I suppose it's in the same way as when Malachy was born, we just had to get on with doing what we had to do. I think our journey through grief has been the same. We just have to get on, so we do.
Well, Dom, you have written a most magnificent book, I think, and I'm very proud to have met Malachy along the way. Very proud of what you've done and to have played a very small role in his wonderful life that we're celebrating here today with this book. I recommend it to parents, not just of heart kids, but parents generally, because